Welcome to Transmission Podcast. I'm your host, Cecilia Lynn Jacobs. For the next little while, we invite you to speculate on the possibility of life on Proxima b, the closest known planet outside of our solar system that has the potential to support life. In each episode, we question what would happen if we suddenly knew we were no longer alone in the universe, and what that would mean for humanity to become an interstellar civilization. Please, stay close. On this episode of Transmission Podcast, we're considering what sort of vessel we might take on an interstellar journey. For those familiar with the Star Trek universe, I've heard that the Borg had the right idea in ship design. Sleek aerodynamics don't mean much in a near vacuum, so their floating cube, which could be oriented in any direction, seemed as good a choice as any if you don't need to deal with an atmosphere. Anyways, we're decades, if not centuries, away from any sort of interstellar spaceflight. But if we let our imaginations run wild with the science we currently understand, what could we come up with?
So I think the first spacecraft, if they were to approach us in a year or 3 years or 5 years, it would be the most technologically challenging activity ever undertaken by humanity.
That's Dr. Jacklyn R. Green of Agate Biosciences.
You know, the speed that we're going to get to, we're going to have to calculate that and figure that out. You know, we're in the very infancy of being able to think about an interstellar mission at this time. So this is where we'd have to bring this best of all of these engineering disciplines together under the umbrella of systems engineering to optimize it, to be able to say, here's really how far we'd be able to use a propulsion system to accelerate us. But we'd want to get to a sizable fraction of the speed of light to get out far. Of course, then the opposite problem is how do you slow down to be able to rendezvous with your friends out there. You know, some people might say maybe we need to use a solar sail system. This is where you expand a massive piece of gossamer structure, and using that same idea of low thrust, you use the sunlight itself as it's like the wind to blow the sail. I'm using an analogy here. But, to blow the sail, like the ancient mariners had the wind to help blow them across the ocean. We might use a solar sail to help us get across our solar system and accelerate us. Now, if we had a multi-generational spacecraft and we had that solar sail and we had a rugged solar sail and it was robust, or we had a spare one, a spare few of them tucked away in a special origami type of folding pattern that was very efficient and lovely, we might be able to use that to slow down if we were able to get to the star system in the time, but probably over a multi-generational mission.
Jacklyn pointed out that high-thrust systems, the impressive rockets we might be familiar with, may not be the most efficient way to propel ourselves on an interstellar journey.
In a very simple-minded way, we can say we have two ways of doing it. We have a high thrust and the low thrust. In a high thrust system, this is when you see your rocket launch off the launch pad, and there's fire and there's smoke coming out of that back end of that rocket, and it's just comes off of the launch pad, and it's so powerful, and you feel the vibrations, and it's in your gut, and you feel your chest vibrating, and it's oh yeah, man, that is power. We're gonna go. But is actually very inefficient, because coming out of the back end of that rocket is unspent fuel and various byproducts that maybe you could use in some way to help you get thrust. So it's inefficient. Too much extra unspent fuel, too much mass, because you've got to try to minimize your mass. Now, a low thrust system is one where we would probably use something called electric propulsion. And in electric propulsion, it's down at the molecular level, the atomic level. We're taking let's just say, and it's an example, something that we're using right now is we're using solar electric propulsion. We're creating electricity on the spacecraft that causes a little voltage drop across a very tiny gap. And we're accelerating atoms of xenon. It's a noble gas. And this electrical current coming from solar energy is accelerating these xenon atoms across this gap. And each time a xenon atom zips across there, it gives a microscopic little kick to the spacecraft. So just think about electrical propulsion is atom by atom, bit by bit, tiny bit, the spacecraft is getting kicked along its way, just at the tiniest little level. But it's super efficient because each and every atom that's ejected is giving a tiny kick. And this compares to a high thrust system in which you're just like igniting it and blowing it up. And it's pushing very hard on the spacecraft, so you get a big thrust to like get us out of the atmosphere or get us on the way to a far place. But then you've used up all your mass. So how it's this idea of sustainability. How do you create more of a sustainable rocket? And one of the things that I believe is that by using this low thrust system, and I'm not alone in this, we're using these right now because it's so efficient from a mass perspective, because it's all about mass, getting mass out there. I think we would linger in the inner solar system with a low thrust propulsion system, and you've got to build up your speed. So what we see is you'd probably stay in the inner solar system, and maybe you would use solar electric propulsion and take advantage of being in the inner solar system with some large solar panels to get the sunlight, convert that to electricity, and then use that electricity to power your low thrust propulsion system. So you'd stay in there, and it might take you actually a couple of years or 5 years. We'd have to do the calculations to get enough thrust, and then you would say, okay, we're ready for our maneuver, and then away you go on your way. And then you would be able to use your solar panels right now with our technologies efficiently, maybe out towards Jupiter, and you'd still get some sunlight further out, maybe like Saturn, but somewhere out there, not that far away considering the journey that you're on, the solar panels wouldn't really be very efficient for getting you that electric propulsion. At that time, you might switch over to a nuclear system. You may have some radioisotope power systems on board. And a radioisotope power system is one in which we use the natural decay of a radioactive element, which produces heat. You've probably all heard about radioactive elements and in their half-life, where over the course of their half-life, they decay into something that's benign and inert. And in that decay, they give off a little bit of heat. We are able to convert that heat through, there's a couple of systems we would use, but let's just say thermoelectrics. It uses basic physics to take heat and turn it into electricity. We could then have a nuclear electric propulsion system. And we'd be able to use, because we just want to generate electricity. So by choosing the right radioisotope and knowing its decay and its half-life, we would be able to produce electricity and help still give that low thrust system some power to accelerate.
We also spoke with Rhae Adams, who works in asteroid mining. He is deeply involved in the development of spacecraft. For his purposes, all of the crafts must be designed to accommodate failure.
When you look at the bigger agencies run by, nation states, NASA, ESA, the ones we're all familiar with, they take a very specific approach to building spacecraft, which is that it cannot fail. And so it becomes very expensive. When things can't fail, you design them in such a way that it can be expensive. The parts are very custom. It's not very repeatable. We've actually taken the opposite approach, where we've pulled in disciplines kind of across the board. We have our employees that spent time at NASA and spent time at JPL. We have a lot of the Mars Curiosity rover team as part of our team, and their expertise is unbelievably valuable. But we also have tried to pull in, folks from Intel that know how to design compute elements that maybe aren't thinking about things like you would at NASA or one of the big agencies. So our team is very, very cross-functional. A lot of the approaches we take in building our spacecraft are very novel and unique. And you see that really with the way we iterate. We want to be launching as much as we can and testing and testing and testing, because we're okay with some failure. We like to say we'll fail gracefully. So as things start to break down, our system is built to be flexible enough that we can continue with our mission, maybe in a reduced capacity, but in such a way that we can, buy parts off the shelf rather than need to build everything ourselves.
Rhae is clearly very hopeful, but Dr. Joel Meyers from the Canadian Institute for Theoretical Astrophysics at the University of Toronto shared some very practical concerns with us.
Our current technology is limiting in a lot of ways in terms of transporting humans vast distances. And so if we're thinking about something that is tens of light years away, conventional technology in terms of space travel limits us to something on the order of, let's say, tens or hundreds of kilometers per second. And that's sort of stretching our current limitations. So I'm thinking of fuel-based rockets to transport stuff through space. At that speed, it would take on the order of 10,000 to 100,000 years to reach something that's on the order of tens of light years away. So very clearly, right away, we're talking about a one-way trip, and we're talking about the people who leave here are not going to be the people who arrive there. Those are some of the big practical limitations in terms of how you even begin to frame a mission like this. That's not to speak at all of the energy requirements and the cost of building such a craft. But in terms of how you would begin envisioning a mission, it's extremely unlikely that the people who leave will be the same people who arrive, and it's even more unlikely that when whoever arrives, that the people who actually started the mission will be able to get information back from those who arrived there.
All of this doesn't even begin to address the issues of getting humans involved. Alires Almon from 100 Year Starship reminds us that once we've engineered for speed, we have to consider how this journey will affect the passengers.
When we start thinking about journeying to another star, the first thing we think of is, can we get there? How do we get there? What's the vehicle we're going to go in? That's great. That's a great technological focus to have. But the other thing is, and this is very specific, is what about the humans? You're now taking humans, not just sending a probe, not just sending, an uncrewed ship or something like that. There are going to be humans involved. And how do you do the care and feeding of the humans, not only from a life sciences perspective, but from a mental health perspective, and then also all the things in between? So with clothing and self-expression, that's a great question. We all, that's part of our humanity is, being unique and expressing ourselves. But you have to balance that with the needs of practicality. So you may have a uniform that you have to wear or a certain type of clothing. Does it come in different colors? Maybe, maybe not. Can you take a lot of clothing? No, because you have to reframe the journey. It's not like packing up and going on a vacation. This is packing up and going and pioneering in a place that you've never been. No one really knows all the impacts that you're going to have, both psychologically, physiologically. And that's part of my research, is looking at, okay, we're going on this journey, this 2-year journey, even to Mars. Mars is going to be a really big milestone for deep space exploration and human deep space travel, that we're going to be like, okay, you're going about a year and a half, going to be gone. You have to manage yourself with 6 to 8 people that you'll never get away from because it's a small space. And so how do I keep my self-identity, keep myself not only physically healthy, but mentally healthy, that I will be able to continue to do the tasks that I've been assigned, to interact effectively with my crewmates. If I have a bad day, and people do have bad days, what effect is that going to have on everyone? How is that going to be perceived? How am I going to handle uncertainty?
With all of this in mind, Dr. Duncan Forgan at University St. Andrews reminds us that by traveling this distance, we're looking at the longer-term success of a mission and the need to plan for resources.
Well, first of all, it's a self-contained voyage that's longer than, I think, any voyage ever, in terms of time span, than any voyage ever conducted on the Earth. You're talking about, even with some of the most extreme ideas for accelerating a spacecraft, and you're talking about 500 years,